international organizations in Geneva. He has a really long history of public service. Prior to his work at the UN, he served as assistant to the president and director of the Domestic Policy Council for the Executive Office of the President. He has several other positions that he served in, and he earned a BA from Franciscan University in Steubenville in Ohio and a JD from Catholic University of America right here in Washington, D.C. He and his wife, Maria, have 4 children and live in Virginia. And without further ado, first we'd like to thank you for giving us this space that we could come in, but I'd love to invite you to come and make some remarks yourself.
Thank you for the kind introduction and for starting us off. I want to take the opportunity to welcome all of you again here to the Victims of Communism Museum. For those of you that this is your first time, welcome. For returning visitors, thanks for coming back. I want to thank you all for joining us this evening for a very important event. We're honored to be co-hosting this with the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation. As you all know, Hong Kong was once a beacon of freedom and liberty. Today, basic human freedoms, including the most fundamental human rights, religious freedom, are being suppressed by the Chinese Communist Party. Today, heroes for freedom, like Jimmy Lai, who have resisted the CCP's tyranny, are languishing in prison. Jimmy, who was the recipient of the 2021 Truman Reagan Medal of Freedom by DOC, spoke out continuously against the CCP's crimes and cruelties, at great risk to himself and his family's well-being. And he's now paying the price for his courage, for the cause of the freedom for the people of Hong Kong. Last May, 90-year-old Catholic Cardinal Joseph Zen, another recipient of DOC's Truman Reagan Medal of Freedom, was arrested. And more serious accusations under the new national security law, for which official charges have yet to be filed, could leave him in jail for the rest of his life. Hong Kong has been increasingly threatened and suffocated by the CCP since the 1997 handover from Great Britain. The small but determined city has had to fend off the CCP's as leaders in Beijing undermine Hong Kong's autonomy and freedom at every turn. The CCP has replaced Hong Kong's officials with Communist Party enforcers and loyalists. They have arrested dozens of pro-democracy leaders like Jimmy Lai and criminalized disrespect towards the Chinese national anthem. They have postponed elections, threatened journalists, and jailed dissenters. They have put in place this new draconian national security law, bypassing the Hong Kong legislature, which restricts the media, weakens Hong Kongers' civil rights, and gives more power to the police. They have censored library books about democracy and have infiltrated public schools with communist propaganda. Sadly, the response by the United States, the international community, and others around the world has been frankly ineffective. The 2020 act by the CCP, implementing the national security law during the global pandemic, violated its own international agreement that it had made, and shows that the PRC, under the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, cannot be trusted. And the United States and every other country around the world, the international organization, need to point out and take action that its violation of this international agreement must be met with response. Until recently, the people of Hong Kong were the only people in all of China who could commemorate the Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989, free from state repression. Since 1989, hundreds of thousands of Hong Kongers gathered faithfully every year to mourn those that lost their lives during the annual vigil in Victoria Park. Today, those who organize the annual vigil are being persecuted by the CCP, now that they have snuffed out any dissents to their one-party rule. This past June, as part of opening our new museum here, DOC organized with partners a special exhibition on the Tiananmen Square massacre, which represented the most extensive exhibit ever mounted in the United States on the Chinese people's heroic struggle for democracy in 1989. In May of last year, VOC, we had a very busy year last year. In May of last year, VOC released the Xinjiang police files, which many of you are undoubtedly aware of, a cache of tens of thousands of documents that was analyzed and led by VOC's senior fellow and director of China Studies, Dr. Adrian Zenz, which contained the first images the world has seen of the atrocities being committed inside the Xinjiang camps. You may have noticed some of these images on the banners downstairs at the entrance to the museum. Released just days before the visit by the previous High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, the Xinjiang police files spurred statements by international leaders, including a resolution that was passed by an overwhelming majority of the European Parliament, and of course, the long-awaited release of the UN's report on Xinjiang. But, as you will hear from Nury Turkel tonight, this genocide is still happening today. And the infamous words, "never again," will continue to ring hollow until this genocide too comes to an end. In Hong Kong and across China, leaders and ordinary citizens alike continue to suffer at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party's tyranny, and we must stand for them and continue to call for the Chinese government to be held accountable for its human rights crimes. We at VOC will continue to call on the international community and the United States leadership to hold the CCP accountable for the genocide against the Uyghur people and its human rights abuses against Hong Kongers and other Chinese citizens. Once again, I want to welcome you all and thank you all for joining us here this evening as we commemorate those who have suffered and died under communism, as we stand with those who are today fighting for freedom around the world. Thank you all for joining us.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador Bremberg. I'd now like to welcome the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation's Chairman of the Board, Ambassador James Cunningham. Ambassador Cunningham served as Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations, Consul General for Hong Kong and Macau, Ambassador to Israel, and Deputy Ambassador and Ambassador to Afghanistan. He is currently a consultant and adjunct faculty member at Syracuse University's Maxwell School and a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. So without further ado, Ambassador Cunningham.
Thank you all, and thank you for joining us this evening. Let me start by thanking Ambassador Bremberg and the Foundation for partnering with us and presenting this event tonight and for welcoming us into this beautiful new home of yours. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you to all of our guests for coming and being part of this and listening to what we have to say and hopefully taking something away from it. Ambassador Bremberg did a great job, I think, of giving a brief but powerful description of what has happened in Hong Kong in the last year and a half, 2 years, and before that to some extent. I'm going to talk more broadly about, because it's the name of our foundation, about freedom in Hong Kong and why it matters. Why does Hong Kong matter to the world more broadly, and why should we be doing something about it? The name of our group, the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation, states its purpose in its name. We're hoping to protect and restore freedoms in Hong Kong, and freedom of religion is on the list of those freedoms that are going to be under stress and to be curtailed. Cardinal's End, I think, is only unfortunately the tip of the iceberg. And a good friend of mine. And of course, we all wish him well. We seek to restore the personal freedom to those who've been oppressed for exercising what used to be their rights in Hong Kong. Jimmy Lai, Joshua Wong, and many others who are in prison now because they did things that were normal to do in Hong Kong until purposes, the purpose of tonight's event in some respects, is to keep our publics engaged and concerned about what is happening in Hong Kong, and to spur people to not just remember what's happening, but to do something about it. So why is that the case? Why should anybody care about what's happening in this city-state of 8 million people on the other side of the world? Americans, Europeans, and all people who profess and in action do support and create and work hard to create free societies should be engaged in Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is the place in the world right now where the clash between authoritarianism and free societies is taking place. It's happening in many other places as well, but Hong Kong is a particularly clear example of what this conflict is about. Hong Kong, when I was there in Hong Kong from 2005 to 2008, in retrospect, kind of golden years. In those days, Hong Kong was the freest part of China. Its people, they didn't have democracy, they had elements of democracy. But we thought that democracy was developing and would evolve. But they had freedoms, personal freedoms, institutional freedoms, and the rule of law. Hong Kong styled itself as Asia's world city. And people like me hoped that it could be an example over time for a growing and evolving China. Now, today, Hong Kong is sadly distinguished by the purity of the conflict, in terms of one of my colleagues, as the CCP dismantles the freedoms to which many in Asia and other places in the world aspire. And that is why Hong Kong should matter. Repression should never be accepted. The trashing of international obligations by China should never be accepted. And the CCP's vision for society and for the international order that it seeks to establish should never be accepted. All of that is embodied in this one place, Hong Kong, right now. The Washington Post digital version has a tagline, "Democracy dies in darkness," which is very eloquently and succinctly flags the critical role of press freedom in preserving the kinds of societies that we defend. But I've been struck in reading that almost every time I see it, that freedom itself not only dies in darkness, it dies in broad daylight, in front of our eyes. From Hong Kong and China to Afghanistan, Ukraine, and places too numerous to mention, as the world looks on in broad daylight, freedoms are being extinguished. Authoritarians count on the short memories of free societies, the famously short attention span of America in particular. They rely on the apathy of populations who have other things on their mind and who are busy taking care of their own affairs, particularly in these perilous times. They rely on public fatigue, and they rely on the greed of those who benefit from situations where freedom is in conflict with other goals and objectives, and that, of course, is the case in spades in China. Freedom must not become, as the CCP leaders have claimed, a spent force in the world. But whether that happens or not will depend on people like you and ordinary people throughout the world, not just in the United States, in Europe, in Asia, Latin America, Africa, everywhere. It is a historic task in the 21st century to oppose the loss of freedom and not ignore it. And I hope we can help make that a reality. Thank you very much.
Now I'd like to invite Nury Turkel to come and join me on the stage. Nury, is truly a joy to have you here. Nury is an attorney, author, foreign policy expert, and advocate with nearly 2 decades of experience experience working in the intersection of law, business, government, and the human rights community. He is currently serving as the chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. Nury also serves as a senior fellow at Washington think tank, the Hudson Institute, where he works on U.S. foreign policy and national security issues. A fun fact about Nury, in 2020, he was in Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world, and in 2021, he was listed as one of Fortune's 50 greatest leaders. In June 2021, he received the inaugural Notre Dame Prize for Religious Liberty, which he's remarked to me was such an honor to receive as a Uyghur Muslim receiving an award from a Catholic university. In September, he was awarded the Global Soul Award by Jewish World Watch. He was a Juris Doctor and a Master of Arts in International Relations from American University, and he resides here in Washington, D.C. And I have to say, I strongly commend his 2022 book, No Escape, The True Story of China's Genocide of the Uyghurs, which was published in the US, the UK, and Finland. So without further ado, I'm really excited for us to go ahead and kick off our conversation. So Nury, can you tell us a little bit about the current state of religious freedom in Hong Kong?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here to follow the pastors to share some thoughts with you. I was at the State Department last night, late last night, and I know that something was in the pipeline. You all know that it was a pretty big announcement, and I congratulate you for the efforts. We're not done yet. We have a lot of work to do. Those of you who are not familiar with the USERP, USERP is a federal government agency set up under the mandate of 1998 International Religious Freedom Act. We are statutorily mandated to monitor, research, document religious freedom violations given to 27, 29 countries. And China has been one of them. And since 1999, China has been designated as its country of particular concern. For obvious reason, that the Communist Party, from the very beginning, more apparently in the last 11 years, has been very hostile towards religion. Religious persecution started mainly in mainland China. Now we start seeing the signs of expanding that repression into Hong Kong. We talked about the previous speakers mentioned Jimmy Lai, but we also cannot forget that Cognizant, very high-ranking Catholic religious leader, subject to persecution. I was in Vatican meeting with the top diplomat, who's appointed Secretary of State. Right before my arrival there, Cognizant was also in Vatican, and those people. He sounded alarm there that I was briefed that there's the Hong Kong state a concerning research like religious freedom. And as I mentioned earlier, the Chinese state has been fearful of two things. One is domestic unrest. The other is foreign encirclement. So when they find religious persecution, religious freedom in the foreign encirclement aspect, we look at the way that they accuse both Jimmy Lai and Cognizant. There's a collusion with foreign hostile forces. So that element explains why this regime is so fearful. I worry that what we're seeing now with these two tremendous leaders, plus Pastor Chen, is just the tip of the iceberg. If we don't start talking about this, and then we need to talk about screaming from the rooftop of the Hong Kong democracy, but at the end of the day, this is very important. Hong Kong has a large mission in particular.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I'm so glad that you brought up not only Jimmy Lai, but also Turkel and just so many who are speaking out about the rising religious persecution. I think they're really pointing us to the writing that is on the wall that a lot of us maybe have anything gonna happen in Hong Kong, but I think that, you know, some people say hope is not a policy, so we need to be prepared for the worst. I think that transitions really nicely to my next question. What keeps you up at night? You know, how's your own experience monitoring China's repression against other groups like Uyghurs, Tibetans, and Christians, particularly in the PRC, inform your fears about what could happen in the future in Hong Kong?
What keeps me awake at night is actually quite simple. The apparent normalization of bad news. The news of the free world has been ultimately speaking out against Putin's war crimes, unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. And we rightfully talk about those children, civilians, and killed. But at the same time, same type of logic, the same type of approach, same type of analogy, have not been used when it comes to Xi Jinping and China. That kind of, I can call it double standard, but not serious approach, makes me worry that what is happening in China with respect to the Uyghurs, with respect to Hong Kongers in Hong Kong, and potentially others, is something that decades of repression against Tibetans. So this behavior, because of entanglement in economic issues, geopolitical issues, now the climate crisis, we have another issue, the fentanyl crisis. Policymakers will continue to tone it down, but not showing the kind of courage and leadership. If this let go, if leaders like Xi Jinping will not hold to account for violating international laws and rules and agreements, despite the fact that China is, as the Secretary of State recently said, the single largest beneficiary of rules-based international order. And now they violating every single thing. So what is an outrage? Without an outrage, without holding them to account, I worry that this becomes normal. Because there are a lot of countries follow the Chinese model. China has not been publicly promoting their model of governance, but there's a very subtle way of normalizing the bad behavior through economic coercion, diplomatic coercion, exploitation of sophisticated surveillance improvements. We're talking about Huawei having a cloud storage contract with over 140 countries. In China, essentially the largest telecommunication provider today. So it's happening on multiple fronts, and this trajectory, this apparent normalization, is really disturbing. We're talking about an active genocide that has been its 6th year. It doesn't appear to be winding down anytime soon.
Well, I think that your call that we can't just be silent in the face of these increasing forms of persecution is a good one, and hopefully one that we all leave with thinking, you know, what can we as individuals do to safeguard religious freedom generally. So at the CFHK Foundation, we're really grateful for USERV's leadership when it comes to promoting and safeguarding religious freedom. Can you talk a little bit about USERV's decision to adopt Jinli Lai as a religious prisoner of conscience, and also your religious prisoner of conscience program generally? And are there others from Hong Kong, but also throughout China, that you foresee might get adopted in the future?
The statute, as statutorily mandated, we have to maintain prisoners' database. From we have about 2,000 RPOCs, which is prisoners of conscience. And Jinli Lai was selected and adopted as a RPOC for a number of reasons. One of them, personally, because I was one of the advocates, his selfless, his willingness to sacrifice. He didn't have to go through any of those. He's 75. When he was in prison, he was 73. And now, even with his UK citizenship, his which is China doesn't think that, Chinese officials don't think that people of Hong Kong have longing, aspiration, affection, desires. As long as they can eat, sleep, and do other stuff, that is human rights for the Hong Kong people. And then Jimmy Levy rejected that. And also being somebody who had been very outspoken on behalf of and his willingness to take on that country's government, knowing all the risks facing him, was admirable. So advocated, and also, oftentimes it has not been the case, but if you adopt a high-profile RPOC, then there's a likelihood that you can advocate for others, get more people, and there's also a chance to have that person, that individual, that RPOC be released eventually. So, and again, this goes back to the early point. China has a very specific plan. This is one of the preemptive actions to clear out all of the foreign viruses that may potentially pose threat to the regime.
Excellent. Okay, last question from me, which means you as the audience members need to be prepping your own questions to ask Nury. What are some things, or more accurately, action items that policymakers, that the U.S. government, that the international community can do today to safeguard religious freedom in Hong Kong?
First of all, I've been doing a fair amount of traveling lately, mostly to Europe. One of the key messages that I've been conveying is encouraging policymakers, people who sit in the powerful position, to be honest about the problem that we're facing as a civilization. Ignoring or thinking that this will take care of itself and goes away is asinine. That in of itself something that policymakers even here need to think about. The other thing is that people in a think tank community need to give up on pushing our government to reverse some of the policies, pronouncements, executive actions taken by both previous administration and current administration. Thinking that we can engage with this genocidal regime is, I think, it's a malpractice. It's a moral fraud. So that's one. And then in the congressional and executive branches of the government, we need to add additional legal tools, toolbox. Hong Kong still is a home for U.S. businesses. So do we know how to protect their interest? So we can wait until the Chinese squeeze them either out or counter to the regime. That's one area. The other area is humanitarian assistance. This is something that the United States does not need to have a Chinese to approve or Beijing to approve. This can be done here in Washington, and we have done it in the past. The Congress should be focusing on the proposal that former Congressman Tom Malinowski made to not only invite the Hong Kong engineers, scholars to the United States and let them contribute to the society while they promote advocating for freedom for Hong Kong. And then the administration, I think, need to look at the network of the entities, individuals that have been sanctioned. So the sanctioning is a very effective tool that essentially will make the perpetrators unable to remain anonymous. Specifically, the Hong Kong officials, we already know that Carrie Lam could not use her credit cards. And others also should be facing similar type of consequences. So we need to expand the sanction to the network. We need to put new tools in our toolbox. And also encourage countries like Canada and UK to use the Magnitsky Act like sanctions tools to impose sanctions on the Chinese individuals who have been designing and enforcing those draconian measures, specifically national security.
That's great. You gave us a lot to think about, and hopefully the policymakers will will take heed of your advice. And I do think that's another reason why I know we started off saying DED is so great, but DED is offering safe haven to people, even if it's temporarily. So I completely agree with you that we need to be looking for more permanent solutions, like priority to refugee status and otherwise that can offer permanent safe haven to so many people who share our values and who are fighting alongside us in defense of freedom. So, okay, without further ado, I want to open it up to folks. Please make sure that you tell us your name, your affiliation, and definitely ask a question. It looks like we have somebody here. So, yes.
The microphone or just gonna speak up?
I think you can speak up.
Yeah, I'm former military, so I'm like a god of parents used to say. Anyways, hi, I'm Chris Orr, Senior Defense Center for 1945, and proud monthly donor to VOC. Before I ask my question, quick personal side. My one trip to Hong Kong was back in March of 2012. I happened to be there during the Rugby Sevens, so as a symbolic gesture, I'm wearing the Scotland rugby jersey, but as a peon to happier and freer times from Hong Kong. So that's my question. I hope it's not straying too far about the beaten path, but what about that other special administrative region for the PRC, Macau? Is Macau's freedom and autonomy left relatively intact, or are they going the same grind as the people of Hong Kong, only with less publicity?
I don't have the latest information about Macau, but overall trajectory, China-related areas look very good. The recent backing up of the all four-year diplomacy and also inviting the Biden administration officials to visit is a superficial concession to accountability. This is one of the ways that they have been very successful. They're already hearing people on social media and some things think that China is not over, Xi Jinping is not as bad as what people thought after he sealed the presidency for life. So that's one area. Then the other thing is that you need to be really focused is the way that they are clearing out so-called viruses. In the case of the Uyghurs, they have this method called preemptive policing. They also use terminologies or use medical metaphor, saying that the thought virus need to be cleared out by chemical. So the same type of method, because Hong Kong and Macau is actually the same. They have to be exposed to Western ideology, freedom, religious freedom, press freedom, way early. So it could be a prime target. So I worry that some of the measures might end up being.
Hi, I'm Tara Joseph with the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong, colleagues with Olivia. It pains me to bring this up. I lived in Hong Kong for 20 years, and as many in the room probably know, some of the international schools in Hong Kong, some of the best known international schools in Hong Kong are actually Christian schools. There's also a Jewish school in Hong Kong, etc. So this is an area where there's going to be, and probably already is, a very potent intersection. We know that education is being changed in Hong Kong to follow a communist rule. And at the same time, we have these Christian schools which are going to have to start to march the march. What do you think people should be doing? We think often about putting pressure on businesses, but now we've got a situation where we've got schools who are going to be under this pressure. And I'm not sure if folks in the room have really thought about this or aware of this, but this is part of the decline of religious freedom when you start to think about it. And these are very illustrious schools. Hong Kong International School, which maybe some people in the room went to, is one of those schools. It's a Lutheran school.
Yeah, this is also something that has been kind of carried out in tandem with the Sinicization of religious text. They're changing the text in Bible and Quran specifically, making it align with the communist ideology. When you do that, the text don't really reads or means the spiritual guidance. So that's one trend. And also, when you mentioned the education, they that shows that they have really, really worried about the ideological challenges potentially underlying. When you look at this traditionally, historically, the way that the Chinese describes religion or present this position, one common thing is that they are constantly battling against Western ideology. The religious freedom is all in together. They also see a religion, specifically foreign religion, as a sign of disloyalty. And this goes back to the earlier point, so this is why they've been preemptively taking out or destroying anything that potentially creates bigger problem that will hamper China's economic growth. So the economic growth for these certainly is something that has been telegraphed by Xi Jinping specifically since 2014 with the announcement of the National Security Strategy.
Hi, I'm Lauren Homer. We know each other through the International Religious Freedom Roundtable. And I have a question. China just had to reverse itself on its strict COVID policies in the face of a declining economy and actually, to our surprise, a decline in the overall population of the PRC. And I'm wondering, maybe a vain hope, but I'm wondering if you think that there are ways in which this, what could be a pivotal moment for shaping the Communist Party in China, could be used by the United States, by the UN, by the EU, by other global bodies to put more pressure on China to liberalize human rights and religious freedom.
2 days ago, I attended a meeting with the high-profile Chinese dissident. He reported that actually with a list of names that there have been arrests has been underway, specifically those individuals who took to the streets. Initially, they were seeing signs of mass arrest, but now it's kind of in the works. I don't know if I could say this here, but now I'm speaking for myself. We need to stop saying that we're not in the business of changing Chinese system. So we can have any type of relationship one way or the other, as long as Communist Party rules the country or rules this nation, we will continue to have problems. So rightfully so, this organization, the URC, is very important to educate. This kind of message really resonates in Eastern and Central Europe that lived through communism, why Lithuania has been so powerful. What is Romania is worrying about Chinese influence in Europe because of the communist ideology. So we need to focus on that. We need to start moving. As I said, we need to be frank with our assessment of this threat facing us. When you look at China as the communist power would state everything, economic policies, national defense, domestic policies, even environmental policies, all decided by the Communist Party. In fact, the Chinese Minister of Foreign Affairs is not the top-ranking diplomat for the Chinese State Council for the Communist Party is. So we have to focus on this regime and should not treat it the same way that we treat. Even calling Chinese leaders president is problematic. There's no such a thing. There's no such a title exists. His top title is the chairman of China's General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. The chairman of the republic is actually the last title for him. So yeah, I think we have to recognize this problem lies with the Communist Party.
I love your point about not calling Xi Jinping president. That always grates on me when I see that happen. Okay, yes.
Hi, my name is Sean Ling, who's Washington, D.C. Data Association. And so the Hong Kong Economy and Trade Office is kind of a pseudo-development mission or representation in many cities. And so right now, since Hong Kong kind of already lost its autonomous status, do you think that the U.S. government and also maybe Congress need to reconsider this special privilege given to this office?
I think on overall China policy is business. I don't think that we do have China policy. We need to talk to, when this was kind of the case in previous administration, even now, even Secretary we lose time. I think time is not on our side. We kind of late. They want to bore you with some technology related stuff, but when you look at how advanced that they have been, specifically in the space of AI, robotics, and synthetic biology, that should, you know, I just give you one of the many things that they have of us in the technology space. So we have to, I think, this is why this kind of discussion is very important.
I'm really grateful for your question. I'm taking moderator's privilege here really quickly. In our new policy paper that we put out, which perhaps you got on the way in, we advocate for the closure of the economic and trade offices because we don't believe that because the employees of ETOs receive special privileges and immunities that are akin to diplomatic privileges, we don't believe that Beijing should have essentially two forms of diplomatic representation here in the U.S. And so we do cover it at length in the paper if you have further interest or anybody else has further interest in that. I think we have time for maybe one or two questions. So I'm going to actually take these in a bucket if that's okay with you, Nury. So yes. In the back.
Thank you. Dan Garrett, Secure IT and Chef LLC. Recently there was a visit of imams and other religious officials to Xinjiang. This is one of the latest tours there. Well, we also see this perversion of Orthodox Christianity, the mainland, the patriotic churches, and the house versus the house churches. Also in Hong Kong, I used to live in Hong Kong. I went there with my PhD. You have RCCP or sympathetic Christian churches, and then you have pro-democracy or more, what used to be considered moderate. On the international front, how do we combat the CCP's strategic perversion of religious religions, much like we've done with democracy?
Take your question. I think I saw one of the others over there.
Yeah. My name is Greg Rushford. I'm a journalist here. My experience in Hong Kong goes back to 1969. It wasn't that long ago. So, what happened? Are you tracking some of the people like Carrie Lam, who you mentioned can't use credit cards now, who helped destroy the rule of law in Hong Kong? There's Teresa Cheng. I used to know her a little bit, and she stood for the rule of law in the International Arbitration Center. Spent her whole life trying to get the mainland to respect the rule of law in the commercial sense. What's happened to these people? Are they still operating in respectable circles? Could Ms. Cheng, say, fly to London? Is anybody following that?
And then I'll take one more question. Yeah,
Hi, my name is Lim Kalai, and I'm a journalist, independent journalist from Hong Kong. And I'm just wondering, I would like to listen to hear your comments on the Vatican. Why Vatican, not responding these or speak so little of it, and especially with what's happening to Cardinal Chen. So it's a question.
Okay, it's just the short answer is that I don't think that our government has been investing enough resources on public policy. I'll give you one example, and also the way that these issues, human rights issues, religious freedom issues, is not being played where it should be. When you look at how the Chinese treats this, it's part of the national security strategy. A few months ago, there was a vote at the UN Human Rights Council on the motion to debate the report issued by the High Commissioner. We only get 17 votes. The Chinese get 19. Even that motion was very innocuous, motion to debate. We could not secure even votes from countries like Mexico. I was on the phone at the airport along with another senior U.S. government official, trying to get South Korea on board. So why would we have Assistant Secretary of State level official making those phone calls for us on the China side while he's making the phone calls? So there's a mismatching level of approach. That's one really serious problem that there our way of looking at it is not the same way that the Chinese look at it. And then the other thing is the public education. I have been traveling and talking to even actually most countries that I've visited recently. Our embassies put together luncheon, dinner events with ambassadors from the friendly governments. Even some of them ask questions like, well, what do we get out of criticizing China? This question actually posed to me at a hearing that I testified at. And when you explain to them and make the issues relatable to their concern, then I've seen it changing. So when you look at the type of resources allocated, given the number of diplomats being tasked to educate public in basic things, like why this regime is posing a threat, is sometimes so basic. We have about 19 regional China offices all around the world embedded in the embassies. For example, in Asia, we only have 2. In Europe, a few. So each of those RCOs have about $50,000 budget, and their full-time job is to educate people through speaker programs, through high-level visits, public diplomacy. So the amount of money invested in public diplomacy needs to be done. We have conveyed this, whether we made this recommendation to the officials in the U.S. government, they were very receptive. We had just had finally the Biden administration appointed Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy. So in short, the other side is doing a far better job. The other side is investing a lot of energy and resources we're not even matching. Even though we have a better story to tell, even though we have more reasonable points to share with it.
And then I'll answer your question very quickly. At the CFHK Foundation, we're very focused on holding bad actors in both China and Hong Kong directly accountable for undermining freedom there. And so we think we should make full use of the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, full use of the Hong Kong Autonomy Act, which also enables the U.S. to target financial institutions that are responsible for undermining freedom there. We think that even if there were people who, allegedly stood on the side of freedom but are not doing that today, that they should be held to account as well. So I think it's important that you raise that issue. We think that we should be scaling up sanctions even further, looking at ways to target illicit activities that are happening within Hong Kong, maybe even considering something like a primary money laundering concern designation for specific institutions or sets of transactions that represent illicit activity and demonstrate very, very vividly to the business community that they're facing serious risks as their rule of law continues to deteriorate in Hong Kong. So thank you for your question.
I have a comment on the Vatican. Vatican has been removing the secret agreement with China. The only one aspect is kind of public knowledge, the rest of it is secret. The public knowledge is essentially the Chinese agreement to allow China to acquire bishops. That has never happened. And China has it's a Catholic Patriotic Association. You have to sign on to it. If you refuse to do it, then you will end up in prison. I recently raised the case of Pastor John directly with the Vatican officials. And I did not get the type of response that I was hoping to get. But it's very mysterious. One, they're not getting what Chinese promised in this agreement. And then two, it's mystifying that even some high-profile Catholic prisoner's case, we're not seeing the public. And no one should underestimate the influence of that. They could be very impactful. And even Cardinal Sens, if you look at his bio and public statements, publicly in disagreement with that, very talented. So they have to show willingness to use their influence to speak on behalf of 78 million Catholics in China.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. Would everybody please join me in thanking Nury for